I first heard Amebix from a friend of mine, and what stood out about them to me was that they came from a different mindset than most other punk bands at the time. They had a really apocalyptic atmosphere about them, really a mysterious kind of like a spiritual vibe, you might even say.
Stig came back. He basically left school and went to work in Jersey for a little while in a hotel over there. And he came back and he had a guitar and a practice amp, and he said, "Well, let's form a band." Yeah, and this kind of coincided with something else in my life, which was at as I say, at that point I was doing quite well, but I was in the ATC, which is like the Air Training Corps. I was a sergeant in the ATC. I was doing very, very well. I was a dead shot marksman. I had various RAF awards for it at that age, sort of thing. Because growing up shooting all the time anyway, I knew my way around guns and stuff, and I was set all together for a career in the RAF. That's what I was going to be doing, you know. And then what happened was I went on the Nijmegen marches, which is basically there's 6,500 Allied troops. This is basically you get your Americans, Canadians. Some of these guys were from Korea and Vietnam veterans, and plus these young cadets, and all in a great big forest area outside Nijmegen in Holland. The thing of the event, basically you'd have to walk 20 miles a day. We'd march 20 miles a day with your hobnail boots on, your full uniform. March. 20 miles a day for 5 days, so you'd done 100 miles. And at the end of it, basically, you get a little medal, thanks very much, it's for commemorating the Arnhem landings, you know, where all the paratroops came in and all this kind of stuff. So, great, we've been training for it for ages, went across there, did this, and during the evenings I was hanging out with a group of GIs up in their tent, and they were a good laugh. And there's this one guy called Stan Zorelli, and we got on really well. He said, "Miller," he said, I'm giving you an order, son." I said, "Well, what's that?" He says, "Listen," he says, "I'm a sergeant and you're a sergeant, but I'm a bigger goddamn sergeant than you are." He says, "We're going out in the town tonight." So this is at the end of the week. Yeah, we're all tired but yeah, kind of happy. So I went out on the piss with these group of Yanks, and I'm just a young lad, you know. I was supposed to have been in by 9 o'clock. I eventually got back in at 2 o'clock in the morning, pissed out of my fucking face, with a huge fat American cigar stuffed in my chops. So I'm wandering down through the camp, out of my head, and popped my head into the tent where we were staying, and the boys in there, the rest of the cadets were going, "Miller, you're in fucking trouble now, boy." Yeah, I got pulled up before the officers in the morning. "What the fucking hell do you think you're doing?" We had the MPs out after you and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, shit. So I went back home, and I didn't really have much of a choice after that. I went back to the ATC hut the next week, and the NCO guy was saying, "Well, what are you going to do now?" I said, "Well, fuck, I'm going to form a punk rock band." And that was it. Punctuated. Formed the band with no name. Me and Stig and Billy Jug, who was a mate of mine from school as well, and we got a tea tray, and he was drumming on a tea tray, so that worked pretty well for a little while, along with the guitar going too. And then we got Clive Barnes, who had this ropey old bass, so he brought the bass along, doing.
We're not flashing. We're not nihilism. We are anarchists.
Whoa.
what can I say really, at the end of the day? It was better than glue sniffing.
In what way?
In what way? It was better to spend your time in a band trying to play an instrument which you couldn't tune and having a laugh than the dullness of living in the West Country, really, in the sticks.
A bit older, I'd been over to Jersey doing hotel work and stuff when I came back. And I didn't have that much work, so I got this shitty job doing youth opportunities. I was walking to work every day, you know, and trying to hitch a lift, but like, you know, people were wary of people looking a bit different in those days, like they are now, but even more so. And it was more a case of like, walk along and think about things, and I was just thinking about a good name, kind of like a corporate sort of logo idea for something that's real simple and basic, just sort of basic idea, and sort of came up with Amebix and came back to Rob and told him about it that evening. It all kind of focused from that. The idea came together from that a bit more, you know, because we couldn't, when we first started, when we did the band with a name, well, I used to wonder why each gig used to sound different, because I didn't know that you had to tune a guitar. I thought you just bought it from the shop, and I thought the machine heads were just putting the strings on, you know, to hold them on. I didn't know you had to actually turn the things around to make it change notes. So we did about 20 gigs of not knowing how to tune guitars, and thinking like, you know, why does this gig sound better than the last one, or this gig sounds more shit than the other one, you know? So everyone really hated us.
Punk in the 70s was UK subs, the Ruts, bands like that. I think, you know, just getting into, I was living in quite a small town in the West Country. We were picking up stuff through John Peel, Discharge, you know, Crass, all those bands. But I think the first band I was really into was the UK subs, Stranglehold, that era. I saw the Clash when I was 13 on the 16 Tons tour. So it was just the energy of the moment, really. I don't think we were particularly politicised or we had any agenda. It was just that general feeling of being a youngster, being pissed off with school, not liking authority, and just finding that whole sort of punk thing as a big outlet, really, without really any kind of coherent philosophy around it at all, apart from, you know, fuck it, let's go out and have a good time.
All of this time, yeah, as I said before, never really learnt to tune our instruments. And we'd consequently play these gigs. No two songs would ever sound as they sounded originally, you know, because things were constantly going out of tune, and nobody bothered to ever tune anything up. So it's like, well, just fucking play on this string here and keep going, and it sounds vaguely like it did the last time. So we had a bit of fun, really. We formed this band, took the whole punk rock thing really seriously, got copies of Sniff and Glue magazine and stuff, and it said, here's 3 chords, go and form a band. That's exactly what we did. And really got up people's noses locally, because it was the time where you had Saturday Night Fever, all the sort of Bee Gees disco stuff going on, and people would be turning up at the local discos in the nice white jeans and the pearly bloody tops and all the rest of it, and we would just be these skanky fucking kids in drainpipe trousers. But it was enjoyable. We had a good time going and playing local village halls, getting canned off stage and spat at, getting slagged off in the local press, just doing the sort of small town punk rock thing. Me and Stig being pretty much the only people that are immediately identifiable as punks, in that we had slightly spiky hair and bit tattered jeans and stuff like that, you know.
Chris and Rob were Amebix. There was no one else. Amebix is Rob Miller and Chris Miller and no one else. I was just the catalyst that brought them into being. The spark of life, if you like. And the Glebe was the womb of Amebix. There
was one incident that happened down there which I think had a long-lasting effect on Stig anyway. It made the national news at the time, and he was attacked by a puma and basically shredded, cut to ribbons as a 6-year-old child. 120 stitches, severe bleeding everywhere. I mean, these days he still stitches all over him, you know. It was a really weird thing to happen in the remote area of Devon like that. A friend of our father's was a millionaire, but basically he was a manic depressive as well. and he had one toy after another, and he'd buy a helicopter at one point and go and play around with that until he got fucking bored. And the one of his latest things to come around was to show us, got a puma, but they didn't tell us kids about it. Put the puma up behind the cottages at the bottom of the land, and they tied it with a chain to the telegraph pole down there, and we didn't know anything about it, and we were just playing, and we went to play hide and seek. Stig went to hide behind there, and he basically the puma jumped on him and shredded him. But it was just, apparently he was very, very lucky because the puma, he was just playing. Otherwise he would have been dead. It was just clawing at him, and he came out stumbling out of there, just a red mess of blood, side to side, little white socks full of blood. Pretty grim, really.
I was a little dark black sheep sort of thing, and so I didn't spend a lot of time with him, with Rob, when we were young, when we were little kids together. But like from the age I was about 12, 13, I really kind of went, off the rails and got sent to different schools and got expelled and chucked out of here and chucked out of there, and ended up going off to this maladjusted kids school and coming back from there. And so we kind of didn't see each other for quite a few years, really, and I didn't live in the family home. I lived away in the school, which is sort of full-time boarding, And it was like, the influences I did, I think, in some ways, come from the kind of family we've grown up in, None of our parents ever went to church or nothing, They were all like kind of second, third generation pagans, if you know what I mean, and the Norse kind of side of things, And all different philosophical ideas, things I'd always been interested in, just trying to alleviate the boredom of living in a chicken shit town, just to make a good noise and maybe put a decent idea out there, Basically, just to make a difference somehow, or maybe inspire people to do something different,
When I remember Devon, I am haunted to the depths of my soul by a beauty and warmth that has filled me completely, by the poem that was never read, but that was written within me by a graceful and perfect hand. The smell of ploughed earth and the croaking of rooks in the witch's wood, shadows over the stream beds where the speckled trout wave like weeds in the soft flowing current, the still dry stones of the tors on lonely Dartmoor, away to Tavistock, away to Plymouth, plunging down once more into the wiry hedges and maze like lanes of Peter Tavy. I drank and I drank deep, and I am utterly haunted still by the fields of my youth. Winter 1980. The Glebe is a large manor house on the edge of the moor. It stands high on a hill overlooking the sleepy village of Peter Tavy. Saxon burial mounds lie beneath the foundations. A thin membrane separates us from the ancient voices that stir beneath our feet when the doors of midwinter open into the other world. This is a place of many ghosts.
I think it really started when I moved into this guy Martin's house, who used to be our drummer. That's after we kind of, people kind of go different directions. I think Billy and Clive went off to do their sort of thing. I think they were learning to play properly or something. And I think me and Rob just wanted to have a good time, basically. We wanted to do this band, so we ended up moving into this old vicarage on the edge of Dartmoor, and that was where the real atmosphere started to come in. We used to sleep all day and wake up at night and play, and and down there, man, you wake up like 5 o'clock at night and you've been off your tits all day long, and the mist is going rolling in off the moors, just like those old Baskerville Sherlock Holmes movies, like, it's like this high, little bits of twig and trees sticking up out of it. I think, fucking hell, this is surreal, man. But living like that for like 6-7 months, that's where it really started to kick in a bit more, and we started to sound like our surroundings, a bit dark and mysterious.
It is only the belief that the man was probably the greatest single living human being of the 20th century who came, he seemed to be always at the Glebe, even before I discovered him. Because sometimes destiny and fate throws humans together in strange ways, and if you have the courage to admit that someone who has been misinterpreted all those years, should find a safe haven at the Glebe house is pure enough, because it's only destiny and fate that brings people together, because death came to Crowley on December the 1st, 1947, and of course I wasn't born till 1959, exactly 12 years after. So, it's a strange thing, quirk of fate really. Once I had made contact with the Crowley spirit in my mind, I knew he was there forevermore, see, and that's it. There is no other. And of course Crowley will live forever in the pantheon of all the great prophets that ever lived on earth, because he told it how it was. He showed the world what it was, and of course there was only one thing he actually produced that was like a blip in the whole of the universe, was Liber Alvel Legis, the Book of the Law, and that was the most crucial book that was ever written in history. Rob and Chris came into the Glebe and they didn't know what they were coming into, but I opened my arms to them. I opened up the whole house to them. We had the whole house to ourselves. And we were able to do whatever we wanted to while they were there. We never locked the house up. We were never burgled. There's no fires. We just lived our lives, and we could live as happy as we want. It was a time warp in a way. The world outside didn't matter. We were walking in a bit of a dream, a bit of a dazed state really, because we knew that we had total freedom of ourselves. And all the people around us in the local area would all come and visit the Glebe. But at the end of the day, it was only me, Rob and Chris there. And people came and went. Girls came and went. People came and went. And yet it's part of the Amebix myth that the Glebe was maybe not hidden, but should be shown now, that the Glebe was the birthplace of Amebix, and there is no doubt about it. But of course, from when they left the Glebe, they then went to Bath, Bristol, and did what they did, and had such a short lifespan. But that short lifespan, those 2 albums, Arise and Monolith, has created a sort of myth and legend and cult status all over the world that will always persist, because the Glebe had infused Chris and Rob with the spirit of Crowley and his legacy.
It is night. A taxi is approaching up the long gravel driveway. Headlights sweep over the front of the house as the car turns around. Martin parts the curtains in the kitchen, then turns towards Stig and I to softly announce, "It's Kay." Kay has been shopping up in London. She walks into the kitchen in full kit, paisley print headscarf, barber wax jacket and court shoes, every bit the country girl. She is carrying 2 plastic bags in each hand. The contents softly clink together as she lifts them onto the table. "I am so glad to be back," she says. Stig deeps into one of the bags and retrieves a bottle of vodka. He nods sagely. "Nice one." Kay looks in his direction briefly, talking as she unpacks. "I hit 3 cards for the maximum 50 quid each. Piece of piss. I just hung around the ladies' changing room in Harrods, lifted the cards out of the bags and never raised an eyebrow. It's all down to looking the part." "She is good, very good. And," she begins, "I took a little wander down Harley Street to see the man." She takes out a cardboard box the size of a box of chocolates and opens the top. I crane my neck over the other 2 lads to see a row of small glass ampules. "Ficeptone," she announces. "So who wants a hit?" This is an important question. So important that time seems to slow down for an instant. I realise that something fundamental hinges on this moment. Kay's man is her doctor in Harley Street. She's a bad girl from a good family. When she fell into the junk scene, her parents could make sure that she got the best help that money could buy. Ficeptone, synthetic heroin, clean and legal, if you had a Harley Street doctor. "No, you're all right, thanks." I decline her offer. Martin and Stig want a shot. No cooking up, no filtering, straight into the works. From there into the raised blue vein of the forearm and tap in, drip, drip, drip. Martin buckles over, as pale as a ghost. Stig is thrown up outside. He comes back in and sinks slowly into the armchair, softly exhaling. A smile briefly touches the side of his mouth before the eyeballs roll back and up into his skull. His lips begin to turn a powdery shade of blue. "There you go, darling," says Kay. She pats him affectionately on the head and turns her attention back to the box. I look on. The Rayburn stove crackles and flares into life as the wind and rain lash against the leaded window panes. In the ancient earth beneath us, the forgotten spirits move slightly in their long sleep. A die has been cast this winter night.
I gave them the nourishment they needed. I filled them full of my, my being. Then I gave them all I needed. But I couldn't do anything more for them when they left because I had to recover myself in London, and but I was back very soon, and of course then my life changed in other ways. I was still doing my photography, and I had friends, and I was still doing my artwork, Now we did, tarot cards, Deck of Thoth, Book of Thoth, Gems from the Equinox, Libra, Avel, Legis, all these books. When one had the money, later on, of course, one would buy the books, read the books, one would study astrology, one would delve into all those writings of occult forces. And, when you have time on your hands and you don't have to do anything special, you have the time to delve into things that people never even can do. They're too busy working their 9 to 5 bollocks off. They're too drunk or too pissed and have no imagination. But when you are calm and collective and you know exactly what the hell's going on, then you can practice whatever magic you want. And these days, it doesn't matter what you practice, because as long as you do it with imagination and will and love. Love is the most important thing of all. If you have love, you can achieve anything you like.
But Martin, I hope he's okay. He's a good drummer as well. He used to really build the sound up. It's a pity he wasn't really psychologically capable of coming with us, really. I don't think it was really what he wanted to do. Yeah, it was good living in his house. It definitely formulated some of the sound. Like Rob was saying, it's like living in that atmosphere of sleeping all day and being awake at night. Certainly, even if you didn't want it to affect you, it still would affect you, I used to like that Edge of Dartmoor thing. Live on the edge of Dartmoor, you just walk up the road and you're on the moors and there's just no houses or nothing anywhere. It gives you that feeling like people probably used to feel before they were surrounded and crowded into little small spaces. It's nice to feel that sometimes, just to get away and feel there's nothing to constrict you.
Well, Rob was like a witness to the... he was always a witness, Rob. He was a witness to some of the drug excesses and excesses in Bristol and some of the horrors of the backstabbing eras, in music generally, He was still the person that kept it all going, because Chris couldn't have done it on his own. And Rob couldn't have done without Chris, because they were like blood brothers, like twins almost. But Rob was the one that kept it all going, because he didn't do the excesses that Chris did, see, and he was always straight. Rob is good because he stayed true to his art. And while others were losing their heads all around him and people were dying around like flies, he still kept going.
Plymouth Bretonside bus station, early summer 1981. 4 scruffy-looking characters are boarding a CityLink bus, pushing their few tatty belongings into the hold. 2 of them are brothers. Both carry guitars, which they place carefully into the overhead baggage racks on board, the precious tools with which they hope to start a new life. They have travelled a few miles over Dartmoor on a fine sunny day, the Tours standing proud behind Yelverton and Horrobridge, and the familiar Dartmoor ponies resting in the shade of the few trees that there are. The first of the brothers is Chris, later to be known as Stig, 6'4" in his brothel creepers and drainpipes, hair groomed and spiked meticulously, an extraordinarily handsome young man of 19, fresh and optimistic, with a slight Sid Vicious type snarl on his face. His brother Rob sits opposite him in the back of the bus, a little shorter and less striking apart from the spiky peroxide blonde hair and a military stance. A short, dark-haired boy dumps his kit unceremoniously into the seat and slouches down against the window. His clothes are dark, his hair is swept in one long fringe down the side of his face in the style of Phil Oakey of the Human League. His bag contains a few clothes and a small Wasp synthesizer. This is Norman, the new romantic. Kay comes along the aisle last, swaying slightly from one side to the other. She has a gallon of rough cider clutched in one hand and the other steadying her course. Kay is tall too, fairly plain-looking, from a well-to-do family out on the moor. She holds herself well. She and Rob had planned this trip. Today was a fine day to leave. When she talks, there is a dry crackle in her voice, but very little else to tell her apart, unless that is you look at her arms, purple and yellow bruises in the crook, thin threaded veins collapsing under the skin. A hippie-looking guy in the back starts to talk to them and hands around some mogadon. The cider helps to wash away the taste. The rumble of the bus and the diesel fumes are the last memories before the violent hiss of the air brakes, and Rob comes too, wandering down the aisle, falling out of the bus in a motorway car park and vomiting over the side of it, on hands and knees, as the inquisitive and disapproving passengers take turns to look around the side of the door. Stig hangs off the stairway railing. "Rockin', you want to learn to hold your drugs, mate," he drawls, a hand going up to his lips to wipe away the telltale sleep dribble. I laugh weakly and retch again. Another 20 miles on and we all begin to come around. The streets of Bristol become sun-bleached and hazy, curiously empty after the riots that had torn them apart just months ago, when the furnace of racial tension had erupted within Britain's inner cities, and Thatcher's bully boy police had finally got a slapping down.
Steve Curtis had moved into a hostel. Me and Neil followed afterwards, and then the dole was paying an absolute ridiculous amount of money to the hostel so that we could stay there. And then after a while, Steve Curtis found an empty house down the road and said, you know, fuck this, I'm going to go and squat down the road instead. And so we did the same thing. We went and squatted down the road, but we knew the cheque was delivered sort of at a certain time. So we always made sure we were there to get the cheque that was supposed to be going to the hostel. So we became like, not millionaires, but at that point, we felt like we were millionaires. We just had a ridiculous amount of money. We lived in a squat for free. We used all our money on partying, basically. I don't know. So what happened is we had one squat that got out of hand and got closed down. It had no electricity. It had no water in the end. It had no windows. It was winter, and we moved over to another squat in St Paul's. That was at the point in time of the Bristol riots. So what had happened in St Paul's became a police free zone. So it was an amazing place to be a punk. It was also a very, very dangerous place to be a punk in some ways, because just the community there wasn't sure. It felt like the St Paul's community and the punk scene both it was kind of misfits in society in a way, not fully accepted, not understanding how we sort of fitting into society. So there was some kind of acceptance for us. In some ways there wasn't acceptance for us. We moved into to a squat in St Paul's, and I remember by that point we picked up a bass player called Steve Robinson, and one day he brought home the Amebix, Rob, Chris, and Norman, and that was the whole start. What they came into was it felt very free for authority. There was just, the police didn't come into the area. It was, you could do whatever you want. If you wanted to get drunk and run naked up and down the street, no one was going to stop you. I mean, it was just, you could basically do what you want, but that meant anyone could do whatever they wanted to you as well. So I mean, you could get stabbed in the area, or there was no point having anything of value in your house at all, because it would get stolen. People would break in. We did have like gangs coming into the house.
Stig is lying on the floor a few feet away from me. He too is now wide awake. "What the fuck was that?" he asks. I mumble downstairs as I crawl out of my sleeping bag and over the yellow street-lit floorboards to the stairwell. Someone is running up out of the darkness below, behind them the inhuman screaming. It is Dog running towards us, wide-eyed with panic, a bread bag of glue hanging from one arm as his mouth opens and closes like a fish on dry land. "It's Steve," he says. "He told me to lock him in the cellar. He's going off his fucking head." There's a crash and more wailing. Stig has appeared beside me whilst Norman and Kay huddle in their corners, blankets wrapped around them. "There's nothing we can do now," I say. "Best leave him till the morning. We try to get some sleep." Steve Robinson is the bass player for Disorder. I met him walking across City Road the other day. He is slight and ferrety looking with an intense angry glare. He wears a studded leather jacket, his hair shaved at the sides to leave a short mohawk, what we call a borstal-heeken. The length of the heeken shows how long the man has been out of prison. This is our first squat, a derelict 4-storey building in Albert Park just off Ashley Road, both the stalking ground for prostitutes and their punters. Steve is a casual visitor. He isn't allowed to sniff around the Disorder squat, so they've grown tired of his displays of random violence and screaming fits. So we have the honour of his company by default, along with half a dozen other vagrant youths moving in and out of the place over the next few short weeks that we are there. The Disorder squat is just around the corner in West Grove, a smaller place with a resident hippie, Jitta John. He cooks up flour chapatis on a small wood-burning stove whilst we take a look upstairs. Steve Robertson and Becky Bondage share a room, one stained and damp mattress and posters on the walls. These are the only furnishings here. Becky is the singer for Bristol's big-name punk band Vice Squad. We saw her on the way down the street, or at least her buttocks. She pushed him out the window to pee into the garden below.
Well, they weren't just like a normal punk band. Norman came over as sort of a emo type Human League, because Human League was actually cool. I mean, a lot of people think about this sort of stylophone pop that they turned out, but before then, sort of Being Boiled, it was kind of very industrial and dark, more towards the sort of cabaret Voltaire side of electronic music. That was the sort of electro punk that was brewing sort of post 77. And they weren't just drunk punks. They seemed to have some kind of, sort of an idea and a mission coming to the big town Bristol to do something. It wasn't quite clear what they wanted to do, but and yeah, they had their roots in music. They had the band, and just interesting bunch of people. Not the normal sort of punks that we were hanging around with at the time, sort of the post 77, 78 punks, which were either absolute lunatics, football hooligans, or rejects, really. A lot of sort of rejected people, basically. They were slightly more intellectual and just different, just a more interesting bunch, more creative. They felt like more of a creative energy around them. So.
I have a lot of really good memories from that time, and like some of the sort of crazy antics, and with bands like Disorder and Chaos UK, and Rockin used to go up and play Dungeons and Dragons with Chaos UK, didn't he? While Stig and I used to get mashed out of our face, and probably why Rockin's memory of it as well isn't so happy is because we were probably oblivious to a lot of the crazy shit that was going on, because we'd be out of our face a lot of the time, And it's a shame in some ways that we were out of our face, because there was a lot of really good things that were, that you did get involved with at the time.
Yeah,
and a lot of good gigs, but there weren't as many people who now claim to be.
If all these people that say, I was at Amebix's first gig, we're at Amebix's first gig, man, we'd be rich. We'd be rich.
Yeah.
When people going, oh, that's not great punk rock, I don't want to fucking listen to that. That's the way it is, though. Because
it wasn't a popular thing then, It wasn't, was it? It wasn't the what everyone was into. Yes, it definitely inspired people. I mean, people like Antisect who came along. Yeah,
good.
I mean, another band who had a brilliant sound at the time and who were doing something different.
And they'd been through it a bit like we had.
Yeah,
before,
and I think, like Stig said, at that time there was this whole idea that maybe if it was like loud and heavy, crossing the sort of a narco thing with something that was more metally, then it was a bit too macho, and there was some people who were thinking that was the case, that maybe it's just too macho.
I actually think the Amebix were kind of rooted in it, and I think that gave them credibility for them to hang on to their fans when they went off to do something a bit different, which was their first album, that sort of more heavy metal. That kind of crossover was already happening. I know it was happening in America in a different way, but I think it gave them credibility that they had that sort of a narco past, that they had been squatters and stuff like that. So they had that credibility, but they also seemed like they weren't part of it anymore. They seemed they sort of moved on. They weren't openly political. They didn't have a particularly politicised agenda. They just seemed to be sort of reflecting the kind of I don't know what you would call it, of that particular moment of British history, or where culturally Britain was at. And it was a pretty kind of bleak sort of moment in British history, in terms of being young, mass unemployment. There's a general feeling that we were all sort of thrown onto the scrap heap. There was a sort of mutterings of there is going to be a war between Russia, the Soviet Union and the West. It was kind of sort of bleak days, really. So a lot of the hopes of that anarcho scene would start to unravel. I think Crass would have split up by that point at 84, or stopped making records. So the Amebix, I think they kind of, in some ways, captured that turning point, I suppose, of the movement, of the maturing of the anarcho scene. But they did sort of represent, I believe, a break from it, to be honest.
It was ahead of a good punk scene. It was a lot of bands, a hell of a lot of energy. Loads of gigs all the time. And a good close-knit family of people. There was a lot of people writing fanzines. There was a lot of people with the independent record labels. And a lot of bands came from that area of the country. Bristol, Bath and Warminster. So for that 40-mile radius, there was a huge number of great bands came from that area.
They didn't gig much, and so there was a lot of anticipation around their music. They weren't gigging all the time like Disorder, or gigging all the time like Chaos UK, so it felt like their gig was a real event. And I think it was just after they released that first album with with Alternative Tentacles, and so it was like that album was kind of really anticipated at that time, and everybody was very excited, and they had a different sound about them. They seemed to be doing stuff quite differently. I think one thing they did was they sort of brought together some different groups, so like the biker scene that they were into, some of the sort of ex or periphery of people who were on the Convoy, the punk scene, the sort of hardcore scene. A lot of people, they did seem to be creating something new, but it wasn't particularly accessible in terms of the scene. I mean, the thing with Disorder, Chaos UK, they were quite accessible as people, quite easy to kind of approach. The Amebix always kind of seemed a bit like standoffish, a bit separate. Not so, like I said, so accessible. They were a bit kind of cooler, dark glasses, black leather, which wasn't really what we were used to, I suppose.
They were, huddled in the corner, and, the shit was had already overtaken them, They were with, winter, and I mean, fuck, I no words really to describe the power of the emotion of what they do to us. It really isn't. It's far beyond that. Truly, the beginning of Arise. The intro to Arise. I mean, fuck, man, is nothing beats it.
Definitely with Chris, and had his Alistair Crowley books, and we had kind of sort of very, very long conversations. I wasn't really super interested in it, but I knew they were, and I knew there was some background there.
It was in the time when everything that came out in underground was always digested, you know, and everything came through. I lived in a kind of a community where Neurosis started. We were in a warehouse with 25 other people, and a lot of different music was starting to happen at the time, and it was all we did was music, you know. We just, you know, would work on music at night, and bands all practiced there and kind of created. And so, you know, I remember really clearly, actually, him putting on the Amebix record, 7-inch, and I think it was No Sanctuary. You know, it's like immediately grabbed me because of the different sound to it. It was slower, it was darker, which is much along the lines of where my head was at the time. Well, where my head is at permanently, basically. I kind of immediately felt something in my soul when I heard them that I hadn't really felt with very many things. I don't really know what that is, you know. It's very earthy, you know, like very. It just felt like a direct connection, you know. Like sometimes you hear something and you just know, you're like, well, this is for me. This is something that I can really identify with.
Chris's guitar playing was pretty good, pretty superb, because it was original, and it had an inflection like Celtic frost strumming. It was a minute sound that was picked almost like strumming, but with notes and not chords. And it was an original guitar sound. If he had been, say, okay, he would have carried on to have been a brilliant, brilliant musician, because 2 albums, it was good enough, but he could have gone on further, because Monolith opened up the door to many possibilities.
There's so many things you think about, all the tight things you've done, not on purpose, but just, you know, feces occurs, you know, it does. Shit happens, doesn't it, you know? And a lot of people have died along the way, and a lot of people have been, not hurt by us, but there were kind of people drawn to that sort of thing, and it was, you know, yeah, we've had a good laugh, but a lot of people have died along the way, you know. It was some hard times and some funny times as well, and you just end up smiling through the tears in the end, because what can you do, you know?
No, it wasn't good. It was, you know, what I've said to people before is that the whole thing about Bristol is, it's something that it would have been much better if we'd had a year, if we'd had a season in Bristol, you know, rather than 4 years. The longer it went on there, the more deeply mired we became in this mud, you know. And it's unpleasant talking about it, because it was just like, just increasing despair, really. I mean, we had something going for us in the fact that the band was going somewhere, but looking back on it, we were just getting deeper and deeper and deeper in this sludge. You know, the image that I sometimes use is just a dead city walking around in between different squats, and everybody's asleep eventually. You know, everybody's fucking gouged out. There's just drugs pulling the soul out of the whole place. The whole creative impetus of the Bristol scene just getting drained away by this perpetual fucking erosion of drugs, you know, of smack culture, of the selfish fucking nihilism of the whole thing, you know. I don't have much sentimentality toward Bristol at all. It was a very, very hard time. There was constant insecurity, constant trouble, you know.
By that time, the punk metal crossover thing had taken off in this country, in Europe. And I think somewhat they were forerunners of that as well. So they appealed to a more metal audience as well, not just that standard punk rock audience. And I think they'd taken punk rock to a different vein as well, you know. It wasn't three-chord punk rock, and it wasn't real, like, rusty core, and it wasn't like the American hardcore. It was, I think they were very unique, a very unique sound, and they were great. They were great at it. You know, fantastic musicians, fantastic people.
Because I remember at the time there was a lot of what anarchist bands around, and I personally I was always interested in heavy metal as a musical form, but I thought the lyrics were shit. You know, the lyrics in heavy metal were pathetic at that time, definitely. You know, more so than now. Maybe there's a lot of shit around now, but you know, I'm not down with the kids. I don't know. But I thought that I used to love old Black Sabbath. I liked the way the music made you feel something rather than just the words. You know, and I'd listen to something like Crass or whatever, and I liked Crass, you know, but the words would make you still feel something, but the music really didn't have much of a resonance, you know, like in deep, you know. But that's why I thought, let's try and do something a bit more powerful musically, and we can make good lyrics and good music to kind of get a bit of force together, you know, to really push a point home with a bit of intensity, you know. So even if you couldn't understand English, you'd understand basically the song was saying this or that, was going this or that way.
For us, when we first started Neurosis, we were looking to build a foundation for a project that would last for our lifetimes, and we were able to separate about 6 bands from all the other music that we knew of and say, okay, these are the things that these are examples, you know, people who came before us who did things that we really respected for any number of ways, and Amebix was at the top of that list because of the power of what they did. And you know, one of the things that I really liked about them, and one of the things that we were never interested in doing, was getting involved in any sort of real politics with our music, because we felt that, you know, music needed to transcend all politics and just be emotion-driven communication to a larger, you know, group of people. And Amebix was, at the time, there was a lot of very political stuff, especially punk rock, whatever you want to call it, scene, and a lot of anti-religion stuff going on. And Amebix were kind of had stepped beyond that, and they were basically writing, from my interpretation, these almost religious songs, but from a pagan perspective. But their contribution was totally unique in that way, because they didn't come from this super political thing. I mean, there's a little bit in there at the beginning. You can tell that they have this tie to it, and I know from watching what the fuck movie is it? UKDK, where they're with Disorder and you know, and living together or something, you know, at that time, that's kind of their tribe, you know. But something happened to them which I have no knowledge of, that brought them to a more primal, pagan, warrior sort of sound and communication, you know. Whereas everybody else was kind of getting caught up in details. They were just like way past that immediately, you know.
I just wanted to make music that was extremely powerful. So personally, I wanted a mixture of, because I used to take a lot of acid, and I used to love to listen to Black Sabbath and that when taking acid. You know, it was really cranked up full volume. You know, because it's almost frightening. You know, some of that music, because it's, especially when you're tripping into something, you get hairs on the back of your neck going, oh fucking hell, you know. I thought I want to get that sound with Amebix, you know, that heavy, you know, but with less shit lyrics. Basically, that was kind of the idea with it, and it wasn't really discussed. Me and Rob just knew what we wanted to do, you know. So me and him had these ideas between us, you know, and we didn't really have to even talk about it. You know, when there's something about taking acid together, you don't even need to discuss things. You sit and listen to a piece of music and you're just going, fuck yeah, you know what I mean? That's the fucking way, man. That's it, you know. Like Sabbath, bloody Sabbath. Like, I love that riff, man. It's a fucking immense riff, and especially when we just sit around eating acid, just listening to that. We used to take acid from about like 2 o'clock in the morning and then sit around and watch the sun come up, you know, in St. Paul's.
The music that we've been playing prior, the releases that we put out before, as I tried to explain, they had this sort of disparate songwriting quality to them. Nothing was really cohesive, nothing was really tight. We'd been putting together the ideas and the songs for Arise when Neil announced in Radstock one time, after he and I had been living there in these sort of pretty much, you know, squat conditions, but in a village, but quite happily, you know. He just announced that he'd had enough and he was going back to Clevedon or wherever it was at the time. Left us having to look for another drummer, and we asked some of the guys that we knew in the Bath circuit, and they said, oh well, there's this guy from a band called Scum called Spider, you know, maybe go and approach him. So they had this sort of weird kind of particular Bath type of squat, which is quite nice, you know, on the edge of the railway there, and went round to see him, gave him a tape, and he was just like, Spider's always been Spider. He's just Mr. Regular guy, you know. I'm a drummer in a band. I like drumming in a band. He's brilliant, absolute fucking salt of the earth, you know. We clicked straight away. Gave him the tape, and he came back and he started practicing with us. And what he did was he brought a solid beat in. We were doing, you know, basically no more of this pissing around on the toms. It was more of a rock steady kind of thing, you know. So applying that to the songs that we were writing and finding out, you know, verse, chorus, middle eight, making things exciting, making them dynamic. Really, having a drummer and this new energetic force there gave us the opportunity to really explore the sound that we wanted.
That's when we started to hang around in Bath a bit more and met Spider and that, you know. So we got Spider drumming for us, and that's when we started to get it really sorted out. The sound, I think, it got a lot better then, you know. Because with Virus, he was a good drummer and that, but it was a sloppy kind of style because he was used to playing that very fast punk rock for Disorder, you know. So when it came down to playing something a bit of a different speed, it was good, but it was, I don't know, it could have done with a bit more an edge to it. And I was glad that we got Spider. The Virus was good, you know. I was glad we got Spider because we did that. No Sanctuary, we did that. I can't remember who paid for that one. I don't know if we paid for that, because that's the thing with Amebix. It could have been, the production could have been a lot better on our records. That's the only thing that I do get pissed off about sometimes. I think, fucking hell, man, that sounds so shit. But it could have been so much more powerful, you know. But if we'd had the money, it was recorded with our gyros usually. We just put like 4 or 5 gyros together and we'll save off the money for a couple of weeks or whatever, you know.
Arise was clearly a more of a refined beast than Winter, Who's the Enemy, or even No Sanctuary, which kind of pointed in that direction. It was a little more honed. They had a little bit more of a focus of what they wanted to do. It was starting to go a bit in a metal direction, but it was still very crude, very raw, and in a way a distinct advantage that Stig was not a flashy, fleet-fingered guitar player who could put in a lot of wanky solos. It just was this collective thing that nobody else really had.
By that time, it would become quite rigorous in its own introspection, that whole scene. And claustrophobic, because there were so many people making up rules about what you could say, what you could think, how you could express yourself, what you could wear, what you should be eating, and all these fucking microcosmic rules that you were all of a sudden faced with from a free-thinking philosophy that originally started out and really had inspired us as a band to say, create your own music, create your own identity, and then to find itself in this cul-de-sac of conformity within a so-called experimental and interesting and alive scene, which was gradually dying, which was gradually choking itself with its own will for conformity. Really, we really needed to stay outside of that, and I think it was a difficult step for a lot of people to accept what we were doing. We got slagged off really badly for Arise by some people when it came out. They couldn't stand it at all. They just didn't like it.
Amebix was a very foundational piece in our growing as men and spirituality. Very influential piece.
And when you're young men, or young people, you're looking for your tribe. You're looking for who your people are, for who your brothers are that you're going to be with, for the rest of your life. The people who are going to have your back. And we were looking for that, I think, in our different ways, and we were looking for a sense of who our tribe was. And part of that we found just in independent music in general. I'd say, a lot of the people we've met who we hold dear over the years are involved in independent music. Brothers we've toured with and what have you. But I think that was kind of the soundtrack at that time of who our tribe might be out there. The people that we'll meet around the world might all just have something in common with this music, because it was, especially from an American point of view, you have a tendency to mythologize what you can't be near. I'm sure it's different for people who grew up in England, but for me, I kind of mythologized that English music and something, thinking, oh, that, you know, Amebix has that same kind of ancient Stonehenge festival vibe that the early Hawkwind stuff had, and that other guitar-driven psychedelic music had. It felt like it had the Celtic soul or the Saxon soul in the music. There was something in it that could have only happened on this place, you know. And for those of us looking back over the water for our roots, that was extremely important, to try to think that you might have something in common with this other group of people over there who are closer to the source.
We were just rocking out, you know. We were just fucking thrashing. We were just really just right into it. It was I was always overwhelmed by the music, you know. If you get a good PA and you get the equipment working right and you got the volume right up and it's all clear and stuff, you just get completely buzzed up by the whole thing. And it was an electric and an electrifying experience to be able to play. Some songs, yeah, were so powerful to play live that were just, the hairs are standing up on the back of your neck as you're playing this stuff, and it was really manifesting presence for us. You know, we drew everything up from within ourselves and tried to get it there in that room.
That I discovered in punk rock that had bigger guitar sound, you know, like in a more thunderous thing, and it had the texture that you liked from Motorhead or Venom, but it had, you knew it had the ethics from the do-it-yourself mentality because of the scene it was coming from. It was coming from, you know, the English crass Southern Records kind of scene, but then, like Scott said, it was it brought to mind something deeper. It brought to mind, even though it said no gods, no masters, to me it brought to my mind pagan gods.
The unconscious stuff that was, it's difficult to explain, but the spiritual element of Amebix, if you like, was an integral part of everything that we did. It was like Stig and I were both very much tuned in to the same place when we were playing, and it's like we saw the same pot that we were drawing from, and we knew that that was there. We didn't know quite how it worked, but we knew that we were trying to draw energy up from this source, and that we were aware that it was like the group unconscious of the band itself, if you like. You know, our connection with the deeper root of things.
I mean, I always take all those things as with a pinch of salt. I'm an atheist, you know, and I don't believe in mystical mumbo jumbo. To me, it's just nonsense. I don't believe in fairies at the end of the garden, and I don't believe in Jesus Christ, and I certainly don't believe that there's some you know, kind of underlying dark spiritual currents, man. You know, people do bad things and you'll attract bad stuff, you know, that's my view. So I don't necessarily, you know, the mystique of the Amebix. No, I don't buy it at all.
After Arise was recorded, that was our kind of seminal album, I think. And then it kind of went down a bit. And then we recorded Monolith, which is in a different league. I think Monolith was a brilliant album, but different.
And not as good as Arise either, really, was it?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
You say not as good. I don't know. I wouldn't like to say that.
I
really.
could listen to rises of fans. I suppose that
There's
makes
a
difference,
rise
you know?
there, and Monolith there,
Yeah.
and we kind of peaked about there. You know what I mean? But after Monolith, we kind of started to run out of ideas. Really, we tried different ideas, and thought this ain't working. So we decided to knock it on the head then.
It was either that
You know
or
what I mean?
do more of the same, which wasn't.
Yeah.
You know.
We decided to quit while the going was good. Basically.
Bath changed everything. Bath gave us. Oh, I don't know. It's exactly the other side of the coin when I think about it. You know, if I look at Bristol, I see Bristol as cold, hard winters, difficult, streets full of wind and rain, just desperate times, always constantly hungry, constantly bloody skint, always trying to get the next thing together. Bath was Aquae Sulis is the image of the sun.
The idealism started to break up in some ways. It just felt all very, very wrong in some ways. We went from, it felt like something that was creative and good went into, it felt like it was being corrupted in some ways by kind of a sort of this travelling attitude kind of thing. A lot of the punks sort of moved into the travelling scene, started dealing drugs. It just felt all wrong at that point. Was kind of a split off point for me in some ways.
I came in about 1987. Basically, I bumped into Stig at a party, and I was playing in a band at the time, and we were talking, and he said about supporting them, send a tape sort of thing. So I went back to them, because they're a metal band. I had a bit of a row with them about, and they didn't want to play with a punk band, so I left. And so I sent Stig a note saying, sorry mate, you know, I can't do it because I haven't got a band anymore. And they asked me if I fancied playing keyboards. Mind I hadn't seen a keyboard before. I was a bass player.
That's right.
I thought, why not, you know? And then, about a week later, I met you. He was handing out flyers at a gig. And
That was weird, wasn't it?
Yeah. I just joined this band. He said, oh, I'm the drummer. You know, and of course he hadn't been told, had he?
They didn't tell me fuck all.
Of course, and then he went and punched me lights out moshing that night, didn't you? Flat out
yeah,
cold.
yeah,
I knocked him out cold.
We've been friends ever since. I'd seen Amebix loads of times before, because I was in previous bands before, and I just thought they were fucking amazing, really. I couldn't really work Amebix out. I didn't know what they were all about, you know. There was something mysterious about Amebix. And then someone said, do you want to join us? And I said, all right. So it was a learning process, really. It was fucking great, yeah.
I was into thrash metal at the time.
I came from a wooden background myself.
It's still got a wooden head to go with it.
Whatever.
Yeah. Stig really still wanted to be playing, so he went into forming a band with Zygote with Spider. They still wanted to keep things going. I was in a situation where it was both the inspiration had dried up, but also the fact that I was in this relationship which was really asking a lot of me as a young man who had previously known no responsibilities whatsoever. All of a sudden to have landed in a situation where I had a woman who was wanting a serious relationship with whom I had a child against my express fucking wishes initially, and who all of a sudden gave me a big bundle of this stuff called responsibility and a relationship to the so-called real world, which I hadn't had up until that moment. I've been living this really strange fringe existence ever since leaving school, and then all of a sudden to be landed with this with a big blow around the head, which is, you know, you're going to need to get a job, you're going to need to be a proper upstanding citizen, you've got to be fucking adult about this. And yeah, sure, she was right, but also what that did was it sucked all of the juice out of the creative vein that we had tapped until it was just this withered little stump, you know.
maybe it's like, with people who die young get remembered as being something brilliant. And I think with bands, Amebix are a bit like that. They're like, because they died young, they've left something which stands shoulders above the rest.
I think another thing that's kept Amebix music and vision alive is people, including myself, are always deeply drawn into the artwork. It doesn't look like other hardcore or anarcho-punk artwork. It doesn't look like Pusshead. It doesn't look like Mad Mark Rude or Ray Pettibone or Winston Smith. It was something very, very different. And when we were getting ready to release Arise on Alternative Tentacles, Rob was the only person I ever made the offer to that he ought to redraw the AT Bat logo just for the Amebix release. I thought that would have been really cool, but I guess they decided not to do that. The artwork has been on patches and bootleg t-shirts and real t-shirts ever since, and I think a lot of the people who are drawn to that, in this case anyway, are also drawn to the band themselves, because people clearly are still listening to them to this day and getting something out of the Amebix they're not getting anywhere else.
Things went wrong after the band split. For me personally, getting stuck in a difficult relationship, moving into a house that I found it difficult to afford to run, having to get a proper job in a factory, then working in as a builder's labourer, doing this, doing that, doing anything I could for money, but being very unhappy basically, and really stuck in an unhappy part of my life. Eventually split up, and I was on my own, and I ended up having a bike accident. I broke my arm, trashed the bike, even my clothes were ripped to pieces, so I had absolutely nothing left. And I had it was a real big epiphany in my life. I was finally, right down on my ass with nothing to show for a life at all, and just thought, well, fuck, I'll go up to Skye, visit my folks up here, because I had 6 weeks off from my work because of the broken arm, and maybe something will happen. When I got here, I just thought, take the hint, do something different, change your life. Just this is an opportunity. The door only opens once for you to see, and I jumped.
Maybe if I was 21 and really, oh my God, man, they've sold out. But I don't think they've sold out. I mean, Rob's a decent person. He's not living in some palace. He's not driving some Rolls Royce. I mean, this is a guy with a family to provide for, and he's trying to do a decent thing. And I think it was really important for them to kind of get a proper closure around this. We can't live on some utopian fantasy about what we expect scenes and people to be like. We've got to be realistic. We're all human beings, and like I said, I'm really supportive of it. And I wouldn't tell those people to shut up, but I'd just say, get a bit of perspective on it. Develop a bit of maturity around what you're thinking and saying, and then maybe people might take your comments a bit more seriously.
We swear allegiance to none, be not become. We haven't really got no allegiance to anybody except ourselves in the end, and that's the truth. In the end of the day, it's a universal truth, isn't it? However close you are with your friends, when you're born alone and you die alone, you have to be an ally to yourself in the end, and that's certainly true of Amebix. I think maybe I'm getting a bit up my own arse about all this, but I don't know how people perceive us, or how they possibly think that we are, or what they think that we feel, or that we're dark satanic people or whatever. I don't know how I'm thought of. So I can't. It's quite hard for me to answer these things maybe in a way that people understand. I don't think I'm that bad. I'm not that bad a person, really. I've done some weird shit. I've done good things for bad reasons and bad things for good reasons. We all have, Life's tough. Get through it. But I think Amebix definitely kept me going in the time where I was just fucking despaired and given up altogether. You've got to have something to live for.
If you look at the artwork from Amebix stuff, it's just chock-a-block with these swords and axes and spears and all these weird sort of images which are just underneath the surface. And when I arrived on Skye, I met up with this guy who was really into his mythology and other sort of esoteric lines of inquiry as well. He really encouraged me to think about what I fancied doing, which was, I thought, I'd love to be able to make a sword. At that time there was no internet or anything like that, so I looked for information, for library books and things like that could that show me how to do this. It was very, very difficult to find, but eventually got some books and started up making a little forge just for fun, really, and practice and practice and practice. And now, you know, what I do is recognised worldwide for the basic the quality of the work that I do. But it's taken quite a long time. It's been a really interesting thing to be doing, but something that I never headed out to do at all. It's just a logical extension, really, of what I was doing back then. I mean, people aren't surprised by it. It's the weirdest thing. You know, I had an email from somebody the other day. You know, Rob Miller went on from being a singer in the band Amebix on to making swords on the Isle of Skye. Of course he did. You know.
We are born, the human race.